Good Wednesday evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Carolinas Weather Group, and we're excited about this show. The past couple of years, we've talked about some storms that's hit the Carolinas, Hurricane Hugo, the blizzard of '93, and now we're going to talk about Hurricane Francis and Ivan. They did some damage to the Carolinas, especially inland areas in the western Carolinas with some flooding, but also caused a widespread damage path from Florida up to Georgia, all the way through the Carolinas. So we're going to kind of talk about that as we are on the anniversary of actually Hurricane Ivan, who hit this area about 11 years ago tonight. So we're going to be bringing our panelists in to talk about that. We have a wide variety, a lot of new-time guests, so first-time guests, so we're excited about that as well, and I'll bring those guys on in just a minute. But before that, this is a live podcast and broadcast here on the Google Hangout app. We are always welcome to question and answers. Several ways you can do that. You can send them via Facebook. You can tweet them to us, and I think we also have a question and answer tab that you're able to submit those questions as well. If you are watching this, or I'm sorry, listening to this via the podcast later on, and you have any questions, we'll make sure to get the guest Twitter handle so you can shoot those as well after the show. We also podcast. I do believe our episode from last week is up on that, so check that out on your favorite app store. Make sure you download that as well. So before that, weather-wise, unless Daniel or Kit really want to talk about anything in general, it's been fairly benign here. We have had a cool down in the Carolinas, so it's kind of fall-like outside. But besides that, it's been dry and sunny and kind of just a boring weather pattern. So we'll kind of take away from that and go into our main topic tonight, which is the triple trouble, Hurricanes Francis, Ivan, and Jeanne. And we're going to talk about those in depth tonight. We got a lot of guests on who have first-hand experience with this and hopefully able to share some experiences as well. And we've got a lot of comments via Facebook. So if you're watching tonight and you want to share your experience, feel free to do that as well. We have Eric Blake on from the National Hurricane Center down in Miami, Florida. Neil Dixon on, who is a meteorologist with the National Weather Service in Greenville-Spartanburg. We also have on Jeff Cox, chief meteorologist at WGXA in Macon, Georgia, as well as Gary Robertson, who is the Gary Stevens, who is the chief meteorologist at Time Warner Cable in Raleigh. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on tonight. Gary is a 3 or 4 time repeat guest, so we'll let him wait till last, and we'll let Eric and Neil and Jeff kind of introduce themselves, talk to us a little bit about how you got into the weather enterprise, and then we'll jump into our conversation tonight. I'll start with Eric.
Well, my name is Eric Blake. I'm one of the hurricane specialists at the National Hurricane Center, and I've been interested in hurricanes and weather all my life. I think I got my start back when I was 9 years old during the hurricane season of 1985. There were hurricanes all over the Gulf of Mexico, and it was extremely exciting. And I remember going across the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway Bridge when Juan was coming in, and the winds and the waves. I've basically been hooked ever since.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to hear about your side of what you have learned through the National Hurricane Center, talking about these storms, and definitely looking forward to your input. We're going to bring on Neil Dixon next, who is a meteorologist at the National Weather Service in Greenville-Spartanburg. Neil, how are you doing tonight? And kind of introduce us to yourself and how you got into weather.
Hey, Scotty. Yeah, my name is Neil Dixon. I actually went to school with Eric Blake over in Louisiana, and then from there I did my internship up in Bismarck, North Dakota, and I stayed over there for 3 winters. And then came down to the Greenville-Spartanburg National Weather Service back in February of 2002. So by the time Francis and Ivan came through, I was a forecaster for about 2 years. So it's a pretty memorable experience. But I've always been interested in weather, and similar to Eric, I was, kind of shocked into weather from a Hurricane Hugo in '89. Grew up in the middle part of the state of South Carolina. And I remember when the eye came across, and that's when I decided that weather was something that was going to interest me for life.
Very cool, and we should have had you on for the Hugo episode. I did not know that, so that's some good information. Let's bring on Jeff Cox, who is a chief meteorologist down in Macon, Georgia. Jeff is good friends with our friend Grant Gilmore, I believe, who we've had on several times. So Grant has told us good things about you, Jeff.
I'll send him a royalty check. Yeah, I went to school with Grant at UNC Asheville. I grew up in Western North Carolina. I'm sorry, Gary, but I grew up watching you.
Oh gosh, thank you. Oh,
But
you guys making me feel old.
Blizzard of '93 was the storm for me. That's why I'm doing what I do today. That and Hugo to an extent, but more of the Blizzard of '93. And I was a student at UNC Asheville when Ivan moved through, and a lot of people forget it was also Francis just before that. So it was the Francis Ivan, double whammy for Western North Carolina. So I remember the storms vividly, and how they impacted our schooling in 2004. I graduated a year later, jumped down to Macon, Georgia, here at WGXA, and I left here for a couple of years, went and worked at the Weather Channel and did radio for them. Came back here in 2009, and I guess I'm having fun because I'm still here. So things are good and peachy here in Macon, Georgia.
Very cool. And Jeff, you are an excellent follower on Twitter. So at the end of the show, we'd love for you to send out your Twitter handle so we can follow you. And we'll wrap up with our guest with Mr. Gary Stevens, who is the chief meteorologist over in Raleigh, North Carolina. And Gary, as you guys have known, has been on a couple of our big shows. So Gary, thank you again for coming on tonight.
Well, thank you. Will you stop changing my name? I've gone from Gary Roberts to Gary Stevens, Stevens' son.
I give up tonight.
You spent too much time in Florida, buddy.
I did. I give up tonight. It's been one of those evenings. I'm sorry, Gary Stevenson.
Hey, you're having a bad evening. All these guys were kids when I got into business. Are you kidding me? I feel like I need to go and put in for Social Security right now.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and exit off the show, so Kit, you and Daniel go ahead and take care of it.
No, man, you're going to suffer along with us. I'm Gary Stevenson. I'm the chief meteorologist for Time Warner Cable News. Like Jeff has already pointed out, I was in Asheville up until 2001, was chief up there for a couple of years. My venture into weather was kind of sideways compared to most meteorologists. I actually wanted to be an airline pilot. Growing up, and I thought meteorology was a good degree to have because they don't have an aviation degree, but it was also a good backup just in case the aviation thing didn't work out. And well, the aviation thing hasn't worked out, and 26 years later, I'm still a meteorologist on television. But it's been interesting. It's been a quarter of a century of a lot of storms like you talk about Hugo. Hugo was my first hurricane that I dealt with at LOS in '89. And, of course, we all remember the superstorm in '93. So it's funny. What you guys remember as fresh history is ancient history to me, which is really, really scary. So if I nod off, Scotty, just wake me up, okay?
I'll do it. I feel bad. Well, to make you feel old, I was a sophomore.
Oh, everybody else has.
I was a sophomore in high school when all this happened. So just to throw that out there. So. Anyways, Kit has really prepared for this, so Kit's going to kind of give us a time frame of all the events here, September of 2004. Then we'll throw the ball to Eric and let him kind of talk about the dynamics of what happened that month.
Thank you, Scotty. Well, first thing on the timeline, I'm sorry, I'm going to make you all feel incredibly old. Middle August, of 2004, I start 4th grade at Belmont Central High School, or elementary school. But August 21st is really when everything sort of kicks off with Francis. It's a tropical wave off of the coast of Africa, which a lot of hurricanes will do. But it quickly becomes a tropical storm by August 25th and peaks intensity at a Category 4 at 135 miles an hour in the eye wall. And it's heading towards the Bahamas at this point. September 2nd, Ivan forms off as a tropical wave southwest of the Cabo Verde Islands. 2 days later, Francis makes landfall and moves inland. It's started to weaken at this point. Going back to Ivan on September 9th, it's up at 150 miles an hour. 2 days later, it peaks at 165. Which is a Category 5 hurricane. So this was the strongest of the three. Jeanne, she starts up at September 13th, out to the east of the Lesser Antilles. Then Ivan peaks that day at 910 millibars, which was the 10th most intense hurricane on record in the Atlantic Basin. September 16th, Ivan makes landfall in Alabama, moves inland to the Carolinas really quickly, and starts making that that clockwise flow around the southeast. And then Jeanne hits Hispaniola in the middle of September, 16th, 17th. Doesn't make it to hurricane strength until September 20th. And on that same day, Ivan makes landfall, let's see here, at Florida and moves into Texas by the 24th. Then Jeanne makes landfall in the Bahamas, moves over Florida the next day as a Category 3, and then makes its way into the Carolinas by September 26th, and moves out to the Atlantic via New Jersey September 28th. So just a few days over an entire month of straight activity going through the Caribbean, the Gulf, and the Southeast is basically everything that happened that we're going to be talking about tonight. So,
Scotty, I was going to say, Kit, you've about covered every day of the month of September under 3 storms, and that was, that's the one thing that I'll always remember of this trio is you had 3 really big storms, and it just, I mean, you see that a lot, and it seemed like you saw a lot in the 90s and early 2000s, but honestly, since then, we've not seen that. That's amazing.
Yeah, and like I said, Francis got up to a Category 4, Ivan was a Category 5, Jeanne was a Category 3. They were all major hurricanes within days of one another.
Yeah, I was going to say, jokingly, it seems like the Atlantic has literally just shut off after that. It was so busy. And I'm going to bring in Eric Blake. And Eric works at the National Hurricane Center. And Eric, when you guys look over these storms as they pass through, kind of talk to us a little bit about the storm development. What made these unique hurricanes that affected the southeast coast?
Well, when I think of 2004, 2004 and 2005 both were busy years. But the thing that made 2004 pretty unique is how concentrated it was. It basically, Alex kind of formed right at the last day of July. Remember our party I was at that day and thinking, the hurricane season finally started. And no one was really expecting 2004 to be a particularly active year. We'd kind of gone into weak El Nino conditions, and the Atlantic wasn't super warm. But, boy, it really didn't stop after that. I mean, you had Bonnie form, and then right on Bonnie's heel you had Charlie, and then Danielle in the East Atlantic, and then the big storm, Francis. Before it affected the Carolinas, it affected Florida. Back in 2004, it sort of looked like it was headed right for South Florida. At the time, I was living on Miami Beach, and I had to evacuate, and evacuated closer to the office, and spending those days. Francis weakened as it approached. Fortunately, it didn't hit at peak intensity, but it was a very slow-moving storm, and it took quite a long time. And I had to spend a couple days in that hotel room, and we were under hurricane warning for quite a long time. Francis was quite an endeavor, and then as Neil will talk about in a bit, the other thing that really hit me in those 2004 storms. My mom lives in the summers in Asheville, and she will talk to me all the time about Francis and Ivan in Asheville and how it flooded them out and the wind that happened. She lives in downtown Asheville, and at some elevation, and she'll never forget those storms.
Yeah, and Hurricane Francis actually made 2 landfalls, actually hitting the Florida coast and then going back out into the Gulf. And that's, I don't want to say it's not common to happen, but it's fairly common when we see these storms come across the peninsula of Florida and then hook back up into the panhandle of Florida. And that happened twice with these storms, twice with these storms with hurricane. Well, actually, no. Francis was the only one that came across the peninsula there. So talk to us about the effects maybe on the East Coast and then as it hit the panhandle of Florida. As we first we'll discuss Francis and then Ivan.
Well, Francis was an extremely damaging hurricane. It ended up being, at the time, I believe it ended up being the 8th costliest storm on record. I think since then it's fallen to the 10th costliest. Lots of damage, slow movement. The flooding was bad in Florida, but it actually ended up being a little bit worse up in the western Carolinas. That's what I remember about Francis. It's funny how if you look back, it's crazy to think about how many storms we had so often that they just kept one after another, because as soon as Francis was there, Ivan was ready and forming. We had one of the bushes was at the hurricane center after the Francis disaster, and they could already see Ivan coming. So it was a crazy time.
Yeah, so I was looking at the cost of it. It looks like it was about $9 billion that Francis ended up being finalized as. At the time, this says it was the 4th costliest, behind Andrew, Charlie, and Ivan.
Sure.
Which came in just a few days later. One other thing, while we're on the topic of impact and damage, Jeanne, she was one of the most deadliest storms on record. So maybe talk about a little bit of that impact there.
Well, off the top of my head, I think Jeanne there's a pretty large loss of life in Hispaniola from Jeanne from the heavy rains. That's anytime a storm comes near the Dominican Republic and Haiti, you can get a large loss of life. It's always one of the main concerns when a hurricane or even tropical storm is near that area. Extreme flooding, especially in Haiti.
All right. So one other thing with Jeanne was that she had sort of looped off in the Atlantic, sort of like Ivan had. So maybe Neil, maybe you could talk about how the similar pattern between Ivan and Jeanne with that loop, maybe, as far as like how they tracked off in the Atlantic.
Yeah, so in September, we're quite busy here in the Greenville-Spartanburg area because the forecast area covers the North Carolina mountains out to the North Carolina Piedmont. Then we cover the upstate of South Carolina and the extreme northeast Georgia. So we have a lot of terrain in our area. So we already had Francis and Ivan come through, and then here we are. We're going to have our 3rd tropical storm, or at least a remnant of a tropical cyclone moving across the western Carolinas, and we were worried because a lot of our areas already had close to 2 feet of rainfall. So when Jeanne was coming through, what I recall is that it was another slow-moving storm, but it wasn't going to take that trek like Ivan and Francis did. They came up along the Tennessee-North Carolina border, and Jeanne was coming more across like the I-85 corridor. So we were not as concerned with the rainfall because there wasn't going to be this prolonged period of upslope flow. And I could share my screen here and just have a comparison of rainfall amounts of the 3 storms. Let's see here. And this top map, this is the rainfall from Francis, and you can see that we had a few upslope areas, especially in McDowell and the upper French Broad Valley in Transylvania and Henderson that had about a foot of rainfall. And, basically amounts of 8 to 12 inches was pretty common along the east-facing slopes. Once you got into some of the interior mountain counties, it was mainly about 4 to 6 inches. And then out across the foothills and the Piedmont areas, it was anywhere from 4 to 8 inches. And then exactly 10 days later, we had Ivan come through taken a similar track to what Francis did. So it had similar bullseyes in the same spots in McDowell and Transylvania and Henderson counties. And then you can see there is a difference with Jeanne, as it had a different track, that it was mainly responsible for 4 to 6 inches across the upstate and the upper Savannah River Valley. So that's just kind of a summary of the rainfall impacts from the 3 storms.
Neil, I got a question, and to you and to Jeff as well. I'm talking about Francis. The biggest thing that I remember about Francis, and I know you mentioned about some a minute ago, the storm was so huge in size. It covered such a large area. You take the large, expansive nature of Francis, you take the perfect track going from across Florida Peninsula, then into the Panhandle, and then slowly up to Southern Appalachians. I just remember reading all the old statements that you guys at GSP put out prior to that storm, talking about how bad it was going to be. Neil, how bad did y'all think it? And then Jeff, being at UNCA at the time, what were you guys thinking when Francis was approaching? We'll start with Neil.
Well, we, just looking at the track, it was going to come up the spine of the Appalachians, so we knew that with the upslope flow and the large rain shield that was associated with the storm and the slow motion of the storm itself, it was basically going to be a worst case scenario, both with Francis and again with Ivan. If it was coming across Georgia, it was going to produce rainfall that was going to be more similar with Jeanne, but with Francis and Ivan, we had that upslope flow, and that basically doubled the rainfall that we were going to get. And the rainfall amounts we had, were falling mainly in the Little Tennessee river system and in the French Broad river system. And those rivers measured, especially on the French Broad River, all-time record highs that haven't been broken since. So, like Eric was saying, through the Asheville area, we had devastating flooding. And that was part of the reason why we had very similar damage estimates as far as the property damage values. Both storms were about around $100 million in property damage, and crop damage was quite significant too, with anywhere from $15 to $20 million in crop damage.
Now, you started talking about flooding in the rivers, and we actually have a viewer question asking about the flooding further down the Catawba River Valley into the Congaree. What did they see down in Columbia and other parts of South Carolina due to all the flooding we had in the mountains here?
Well, we have an interesting watershed. Once the rain falls basically north of the state line in the North Carolina mountains, it's going to be routed towards the Mississippi River. The water that falls, or the rainfall that occurs across the South Carolina mountains in the upstate and the Piedmont, that's going to be routed down towards the Atlantic through mainly the Broad and the PD. So it takes about 1 or 2 days for that flood wave to make its way down, but there was significant flooding all the way down to the Atlantic coast.
Hey Jeff, tell us the experience with Francis. You were at UNCA at the time. I mean, what were you guys thinking when you saw the potential that this was really going to bring to the French Broad and the Upper Catawba Basin and other areas of Western North Carolina?
I wish I had a good answer for you, and I'm sitting here thinking, we all know what Francis did. We know the impacts of Francis, but I honestly have more memories of Ivan than I do Francis. And I think the reason why is we had just gone through Francis. And so the concern with Ivan was, holy cow, we just got done with Francis, now we've got to do it again with Ivan. And the expectations from Ivan were compounded because we had just gone through Francis. So we had major flooding with Francis. Mount Mitchell picked up 23 inches of rain from Francis. The mudslides, I'm sure they were out there. The damage was there. The flooding was there. But I just don't remember going crazy over Francis like we went crazy over Ivan. And I'm not sure if that's selective memory or if it's because a bigger deal was made out of Ivan because we were dealing with major flooding in a tropical system 10 days after we had dealt with Francis. And then you had the third storm, Jeanne, that thankfully went east. And it's one of those things where you look back, what if Jeanne had tracked 100 miles to the west just a few days later? Then what happens in western North Carolina? So, like I said, I wish I had a good answer for you on Francis and what I remember. But I think for campus, it was more of a business as usual. Ivan shut off the water to campus, and so it shut down UNC Asheville. So I have more memories of Ivan that we'll get more to through the conversation here than I do of Francis, and I blame that on Ivan coming so close after Francis.
It's interesting that you say that because Francis, caused all the severe flooding. Think about the Biltmore Village flooding that came from Francis. The one thing I always remember about Ivan, the fact that it was such a strong hurricane down on the Gulf Coast, there's a little bit more of a wind element involved with it too.
Well, if I was going back and looking at some of the observations on the NHC report, and with Ivan, more of the wind gust reports were up into the Carolinas. Georgia here didn't get much as far as the wind. Francis was a much broader, expansive storm. So even here in Macon, we had wind gusts of 40 to 50 miles an hour. And we're 4 hours from western North Carolina. So, and some people forget that Biltmore Village flooded with Ivan. And I have some pictures that we can show at some point that I'll screen share. I had actually, I don't recall much of the flooding with Francis. I know it did, but we all ran to Biltmore Village with Ivan. And again, I don't know if that's because Ivan was so close after Francis. So it's interesting to think back 11 years ago and remember something and not remember the other storm that was just 10 days earlier.
One thing, and I'm back, hopefully for good now. I think my internet issues cleared up. And you guys may have talked about this, but Francis had a severe weather component with it. I was doing some research, and it looked like it spawned around 100 tornadoes from Florida to Virginia. So I first want to ask Eric about why do we see tornadoes inside of hurricanes, and then I want to go to Neil and Jeff and Gary, with you guys being in the Carolinas. Do any of these tornadoes from Francis that you recall?
Well, sure. Well, when a hurricane is making landfall, it has it's a very, it's an unstable situation. It's not unstable in a Great Plains type of sense, but it's very unstable in the lowest portion of the atmosphere. And there tends to be a rather small area of shear that can be quite intense right in the lower part of the atmosphere that can produce tornadoes, most often in the right front quadrant of the landfalling cyclone. And there's some diurnal aspect to it as well. But both Francis and Jeanne were fairly prolific tornado producers. Francis was more of a tornado producer a couple days afterward in the Carolinas, if I remember. Ivan had them the whole time when they were making landfall afterward. There's some very distinct video that I remember in the Florida Panhandle as Ivan was making landfall, some of the deadly tornadoes there.
Neil, I want to bring it to you. First of all, do you guys recall of any significant tornadoes during Francis? We'll get to Ivan in just a minute. But then I want to ask you this question along with Jeff and Gary. These tornadoes are normally quick spin-ups, so they're kind of hard to detect on radar. I want to get your opinions on that as well. But first of all, I'll talk about maybe any that you remember, and then we'll go into that aspect.
Yeah, when Francis came through, like Eric said, we were concerned with the bands that were in that right front quadrant of the circulation. So as that was coming through, it was our primary concern at the time. There's going to be some gusty winds and there's heavy rain, and believe it or not, we get more trees down, which is widespread heavy rain and wind than we do with many of our severe weather systems. But so we were getting a lot of reports of trees coming down, and that was to be expected. But when we started to see embedded supercells within the rain bands themselves, I believe we issued a multitude of tornado warnings, mainly across the Carolina Piedmont, the foothills. And most of the tornadoes are very brief, and they're weak. The majority of them are F0s and F1s. And that was pretty much the story of Francis. Outside the rainfall, there was a pretty significant tornado event too across the Western Carolinas.
And Gary, I'll toss it to you and Jeff. Now, Jeff was in college at the time, but now dealing with tropical storms, you guys are doing coverage on TV talking about the flooding aspect, and then you also have to keep an eye on the effects of possibly seeing some weak tornadoes. Kind of talk to us about that, maybe your experience, Gary and Jeff, and in general, how a lot of people with landfalling hurricanes or tropical storms, they more think about the flooding and kind of disregard the tornado threat.
Yeah, I mean, what normally when you think of a hurricane, you're thinking a lot of wind, you're thinking flooding, you're thinking storm surge, and I think a lot of people, especially who live inland, don't really think of the impacts. I mean, the Raleigh area itself took a lot of damage in '96 from Hurricane Fran. That was still cranking out winds, minimal Category 1 hurricane when it came in here. But it's really kind of nightmarish and I do not envy the folks at the National Weather Service who are pulling the trigger on these tornado warnings, because a lot of times, it's like has already been mentioned, there is very weak rotation in those tornadoes that spin up. A lot of times the Doppler radar can overshoot some of them. Depending on where they are in relationship to the actual spin up. But the problem is, every once in a while you have one that spins up and it's an EF1 and it ends up landing in a populated area or something like that. And it's when you combine every element that a tropical system can bring to an area, when you talk about just the winds from the storm, the possibility of tornadoes, the possibility of flooding. I think we've come a long way when it comes to preparing people. I think we've got a long way to go. But when you look at the damage that was caused by both of those storms when they went in to western North Carolina in 2004, and the death toll was actually as low as it was, I think that says a lot about people actually listening to meteorologists and learning what they need to do. I think a lot of them were still surprised. But I also think they were possibly working off of what had happened 5 years earlier with Dennis and Floyd, that hit eastern North Carolina, that caused a 500-year flood for that part of the state. Again, I was in Raleigh at the time in 2004, so I don't know what the preparation was going on leading up to Ivan coming in behind Francis, but that's the trick in North Carolina. If you've got two tropical systems that are going to go into basically the same area, within 2 weeks. In North Carolina, you're going to have major flooding. You're going to have a major flooding event. And we saw two of those within 5 years, with Dennis and Floyd in '99, and then Ivan and Francis in 2004.
Gary, one thing I'd like to mention about that, talking about the preparation here in the western part of the state, leading into Francis, we kind of remember the fact that the last time we'd had a huge flood in western North Carolina was 1977. So that was really a whole generation of people who had never experienced, including myself. I'd never experienced what happened during Francis. But I think the fact that Francis happened might have helped a lot more 10 days later when Ivan came through, because it was it was stunning just to see what happened with Francis, and then you're like, there's another one coming, and that got people's attention.
Yeah, I guess Francis was kind of like the preview, and I mean, you lived through it. You tell us how many people, and Jeff was there too. So, I mean, were people caught off guard by the flooding that took place?
I think some people were, and I could probably give some examples. I won't. Actually, government and some people that were kind of caught off guard on some stuff. Again, it was just a simple fact that the last time that the Upper Catawba Basin had widespread flooding went back to 1977, and just a lot of people was like, I've never seen that happen before. And it's also the fact of, in the eastern part of the Carolinas, where we got the flatlands, you have the floods that occur and the water standing there forever, whereas here in the western part of the state, it's the quick flash flood type that will rise quickly and then fall just as quick. That did not happen here. In fact, I'm going to show some photos in a minute. It's quite amazing the photos I'm going to show you from here in McDowell County look like something you'd see in the lower elevations.
Well, and that's, talking about back-to-back storms, normally one tropical system coming into western North Carolina is going to cause flooding, and it's going to cause some pretty bad. I mean, you guys were talking about the Biltmore area. I mean, that's kind of like here in the Raleigh market. If there's going to be a chance of snow, we send everybody to Person County because that's where it's going to snow. When I was living in Asheville, if there was going to be flooding, the Biltmore area was the first one to go, and we would always send people down there. I remember Beryl in the mid-90s, tropical storm, but it caused significant flooding, including in the Biltmore area as well. And the whole idea of just getting two back-to-back systems in there, there's catastrophic flooding is definitely what you're going to get. So, and the generational thing you were talking about, the same concern has been with hurricanes on the North Carolina coast. It's been quite some time since we had a significant hurricane make landfall, and there's a lot of people who have moved away and moved into the area who've never experienced that. And the whole generational thing on significant weather events is probably one of the things that we'll always have to fight as meteorologists to try to educate people on a yearly basis when we get into severe weather season, hurricane season.
I guess I'll tackle next, going back to the one of the original questions. What is it like covering severe weather in these tropical systems? And as has been mentioned, typically there are weak tornadoes. I'll comment on even the 2005 year. I graduated UNC Asheville April of 05, got the job here in Macon. Well, we all know 2005, and I'll never forget when Katrina, the original model output, was coming straight from Macon, Georgia. And here I am, 22 years old, right out of school. What in the hell do I do with a Hurricane Katrina coming my way? And that was the initial reaction. It was like, my God, what have I gotten myself into? We know the shift happened, but we were on the outer edge of Katrina. We just did a week's worth of looking back on the 10-year anniversary of Katrina, and we ended up having 2 tornadoes in our market. I spent the night in this studio, and we had a lot of damage. We had a couple of injuries. I think one was an EF2, one EF1. So they tend to be weak, fairly isolated, short-lived, but the spin-ups can do quite a bit of damage, and we proved that here. And statewide, Georgia was hammered. I mean, the severe weather with Katrina was the story. The one I also remember is up, and mainly because my wife's family lives up there, but the tornado in Helen, Georgia. I remember Mike Bettis with the Weather Channel on the ground in front of the hotel that I knew and had been there. So for Katrina, not only do I remember what happened to the West, but for us, the severe weather. As far as Asheville is concerned, and Gary mentioned it, Biltmore Village is a bowl. If you go on the other, if you're on one end of Biltmore and you're looking to the other end, it goes straight uphill before you get to Mission Hospital. So it's Biltmore sits in a bowl. You have the Shenandoah River that comes right through there, and it was notorious for flooding. Well, Francis came through and flooded the Shenandoah River, and then 10 days later you've got Ivan, and everybody says, hey, we've not had enough time to recover from Francis, so we're looking for more heavy rain, we're looking for more flooding, you better prepare now. I think we were better prepared for Ivan because of that, and the forecast ended up overshooting what actually happened, and I was actually doing some research and ran across a paper from one of my professors at UNC Asheville, Doug Miller, who actually did some research on what happened with Ivan and why did the forecast models overshoot what actually happened. And so I think there's some good studies that have come out of that. So I think we would actually been worse off had Ivan lived up to its hype, but I think the hype was warranted in that case. I'm going to try a screen share here, and hopefully it's successful. I went through and looked at some of my archives. I put this together in our system, and it actually shows the 3 tracks. So Francis is yellow, and then you've got Ivan in the blue there. Both were just to the west of Asheville. That's a recipe for disaster 10 days apart in Asheville, and that verified. So in 10-day span, we had parts of the area that had 20 and 30 inches of rain. Had Jeanne, which is the green line, tracked further west, I think we'd be talking about a much different situation. So thankfully, Jeanne went to the east. I went through and got a couple of pictures that I found, and these are from Ivan in Biltmore Village. Gary, you probably remember the Wendy's there. It's on the Swananoa River Road and Biltmore Village, and there were feet of water over the entire village there. This is looking downhill. If you look closely to the right of the Exxon sign, there's a car that's flipped over, and that car sat there for at least a day. The water receded. You guys were mentioning how quickly the waters go down. It was pretty dry the next day, so this was while it was happening. I made the conscious decision to skip class that day and had decided that if my professors didn't understand, I had the wrong professors. And what ended up happening, UNC Asheville lost water and they shut down the campus. This is looking off the main bridge in Biltmore Village, which there's a huge rail yard there. And you can see all of the debris in the lower left of the picture, the dumpsters, the trash, and of course the bridges covered with the water there. And these are just other vantage points. And it's something I'd never seen before. I thought this was a good one with the crime scene tape, so to speak. And it's just looking straight through the village with half of Wendy's underwater. So, it was something that we had not seen in my time there. And not sure how long it'll be before we see that again there. It was a perfect storm, so to speak. But like I said earlier, I remember more of Ivan than Francis, and I think it was because of the timeliness of it. What's interesting is, the Asheville Airport, which is on the south end of town, didn't really pick up that much rain. It was isolated higher totals and everything coming downstream with the orographic aspects of the storm moving through western North Carolina.
The one thing I like to add about what Jeff mentioned about Ivan, how Ivan didn't actually kind of meet up to what we were thinking about. The National Hurricane Center forecast and most of the global computer models, the day before Ivan came ashore to Gulf Coast, had that thing actually stalling over the southern Appalachians. And gosh, a Friday, I could only imagine the problems that would have occurred. It was bad enough the way it was, but if that storm would have actually stalled, it would have been pitiful for a lot of people around here.
Yeah, it would have been that would have been catastrophic. We've got to be thankful that the storm kept going, and I think that's another aspect of Ivan that people forget. We'll share the track again. Ivan didn't die after the Carolinas, which I thought was pretty rare in itself, just because of the terrain. I mean, we shredded the storm pretty well, but it moved back over the Gulf Stream and then took that left turn back over South Florida, and this thing was a tropical storm approaching Texas and the Houston area, and so it made that huge loop. And that I think that was making headlines. Several days after the flooding was making headlines. So there were several different stories that I think Ivan is remembered for as a result, and maybe more so than Francis.
Yeah, let's bring in Eric to talk about that, because Ivan was a real unique storm. I mean, just like Jeff was talking about it, looping back out and becoming a tropical storm again. Let's talk about that a little bit, Eric, and what you guys seen from that.
Yeah, that's a fairly unique loop. If you go back and look, throughout history, occasionally you'll get some sort of large loop like that, but it doesn't happen very often. And there was quite a bit of debate at the time on, was that actually Ivan, because it was kind of the low level vorticity kind of split. More people in the office definitely thought it was Ivan than not, but it's one of those things that, looking back on it, it was a strange thing to see, and we were thoroughly sick of Ivan after it come across after writing. Ivan is one of the classic long-lived Cat 5 hurricanes. You really won't really find much like Ivan, but to actually do that little end, that end loop was always to me a little anticlimactic. I mean, it deserved a different ending in the Carolinas to me, but that's just a personal opinion.
And Neil, let's bring you into it. we just had Francis move through with record rainfall totals, and now you're staring down another hurricane tropical system moving into your area. What are the preparations at the National Weather Service? What are you guys discussing? You're trying to get over this major flooding event, and all of a sudden you have another potential storm coming into the area.
Yeah, it was exactly 10 days after Francis, and every time we have one of these remnant tropical systems coming through, it's going to be a big event for us. So we staff up, we all hands on deck kind of thing, and like you said, with Ivan, it looked like the track was really going to slow down, if not stall, right over the Western Carolinas. So we were really preparing for a worst case scenario, the sequel over the Western Carolina mountains with the rainfall. But the thing that stood out about Ivan is that the wind field was so much stronger, and the low-level environment was so much more supportive for tornadoes than we saw with Francis. So I remember when the center of Ivan was over northern Georgia, we had a nice band of supercells lifting out of Georgia across the Savannah River Valley into the upstate of South Carolina. And as that line of supercells was approaching, our neighboring office in Atlanta was issuing tornado warnings on a few of them, and we're getting verified reports. So that always helps us as a radar meteorologist to get those real-time reports. And a storm developed over Franklin County, Georgia, which is a small county up in extreme northeast Georgia. And it quickly developed a circulation. And whenever you have these tropical supercells, that you start to see that shear tightening up real quickly, then that's time to pull the trigger on the tornado warning. So I warned for Franklin County tornado warning, and then right after it developed, another second mini supercell developed right in its train, and it basically developed about the same strength circulation. So when I updated the tornado warning, it's probably the only time it's going to happen in my career. But I put in that update statement that a tornado was near a few towns up in northern Franklin, and the second tornado was down in this section of Franklin County. And the next day, during doing storm surveys, the survey team was actually able to track 2 tornado tracks through Franklin County. So just such a small area to have 2 tornadoes on the ground at the same time is extremely uncommon. It's the only instance of it happening in this neck of the woods that I'm aware of. But that same supercell, when it moved up into Macon County, ended up producing something that was new to us. It produced a deadly debris flow. And I can share on my screen a few pictures of this debris flow. All right. So what happened is that the supercell made its way up, and this is after Jeanne dumping around a foot of rainfall up in Macon County, and this supercell kind of evolved into this line that produced this torrential rainfall over the Fishhawk Creek, which basically ran from near the top of the mountain all the way down the side of the mountain. You can see this is some of the spring water, but this was just a small mountain stream, and this is the originating area where all this loose topsoil kind of slid off of this bedrock, came down the face of the mountain, and accelerated on its way down. So this small stream all of a sudden turned into this wide gulf of destruction. And this made its way down and widened until it reached the bottom of this Peaks Creek area, where it encountered around 15 homes, and I think totally destroying about 12 of them. The sad part of the story is that there was a family that was down in Florida as Ivan was coming across. They already went through Francis, so they decided to evacuate and to go up to a friend's house up in the safety of the North Carolina mountains. but this debris flow came down and caught them up into one of the homes that they were in, and there was at least 4 fatalities in this area. But this was something that was new to us because we've had flows, we've had mudslides, rock slides, but just something that took place over about 1.5 miles, and to do such widespread destruction ended up leading to a new partnership between the National Weather Service and the USGS, where we would share our rainfall forecast with them. They can compare that to their surveys of some of the geology, and then could warn people if they're at risk of some of these debris flows and mudslides.
Neil, would it be safe to say that given the rainfall you had from Francis 10 days prior and then Ivan, basically the soil just was totally saturated and it just slid off the rock?
That's the most important thing is what are the conditions ahead of this heavy rainfall? Because if the ground is already wet, it will take about 6 inches of rainfall in about 12 hours' time to produce numerous mudslides and debris flows. So that's part of the research that came out of this event that we can use in future events.
And Neil, I believe, was there more? I think Kit was going to come in with his experience in Gaston County, but I believe there were more severe weather, severe storms outside of the mountains. Is that correct?
Yes, we had another significant tornado. I think it was at least an F1 or an F2 as it reached the North Carolina foothills. I don't have that those reports in front of me, but I could look it up. But from what I recall, up into basically where the foothills meets the Piedmont, there's another significant 1 or 2 tornadoes.
You know, I'm sitting here thinking I've got to go here in just a couple of minutes. We're talking about the flooding with these storms, and I think it's critical to mention to those that are listening that the reason me as a meteorologist, 2 hours from the Georgia coast, 4 hours from the Florida coast. Gary, you're a few hours from the coast. The reason we focus on these tropical systems so much is not necessarily for the wind. And I think people think hurricanes, wind, tropical storm, wind. We've talked about Ivan, we've talked about Jeanne, we've talked about Francis and the flooding in western North Carolina. The benchmark storm here in central Georgia is 94 in Alberto. Alberto was a tropical storm. It stalled over central Georgia. We had parts of central Georgia that got 2 feet of rain, and the flooding is horrific. I mean, that is the storm. When you talk tropical storms and you talk hurricanes here, everybody goes Alberto. And so those that are listening, I urge you to listen to your local meteorologist, and when we start talking about hurricane season, pay attention to it, because it's not just about the wind that we're concerned about. It's these rain-producing storms. And once they get up into the western Carolinas, it's the lift of the mountains, the orographic effects that you have to start worrying about that enhances those storms. So we mentioned that the threat of Ivan stalling. Had a storm like Ivan stalled over the mountains of western North Carolina, I would hesitate to think what the end result could have been because of what did happen. But even in these low-lying areas, these tropical storms, it doesn't have to be this Cat 5 hurricane. It doesn't have to be a Katrina for it to make headlines. And Alberto in 94 proved that. And so every time the anniversary comes around of Alberto, we always talk about that. And it's also worth mentioning that, that happened in July. That was a fairly early A storm. But, these quiet years like we're having now, Andrew was a quiet year. And that was, what was that, August? So I hesitate to use these quiet year terms on the air, and we often hit these impacts of these storms pretty hard just because of the effects in addition to the wind that everybody always defaults to.
Yeah, it just takes one storm any year. I mean, ask the people of Andrew to see, even in quiet years, of some major damage. Jeff, I know you said you had to leave. I know you had some thoughts on Ivan. If you want to hit on those right quick, we can do that, and we'll let you get off to your newscast.
Yeah, TV calls here in a little bit. It's Ivan. Like I said at the beginning, I remember Ivan over Francis. It's not that I don't remember Francis, but the impacts. We went flood chasing, so to speak, and I'm hesitant to admit that because of the Utah headlines right now. I mean, these were families that were going to see flooding, and they got swept away. So the rule with our coverage this week is to reiterate that turnaround, don't drown rule. You know, you never know how deep that standing water is. And for the record, in the Biltmore Village flooding, I think the local officials did a very good job. They blocked off the roads. You couldn't get near the water. We were on these bridges well above the water. You know, we did it safely. I think things are better prepared. You know, I think Ivan for Western North Carolina was a learning tool, and I think every region in the Southeast has a learning tool. For here in Central Georgia, Alberto is the learning tool. They rebuilt the water treatment plants so that it didn't get flooded again. They enhanced the levee along the Ocmulgee River so they didn't get flooded again. And so I think for Western North Carolina, Ivan was certainly a learning tool. And I would argue that if we saw a Francis Ivan repeat today, it would probably be handled better than it was 11 years ago, which is always good if you can learn from things. So it's fun to go back and like I mentioned earlier, I've downloaded the paper that I had not read until today from Doug Miller at UNC Asheville, and they have modeled how far ahead can we predict flooding concerns when it comes to these tropical systems. What's ironic that his early research showed that the GFS was the best solution for Ivan and the flooding concerns in Western North Carolina. So I thought that was interesting. So yeah, that's kind of my take on it. You know, when it comes to the campus, we had no water. We were shut down. I lived in Asheville, so I just went to my parents' house on the other side of town. We were okay. Some students had to rough it. They brought in porta potties to campus. There was no caf. There was no food in the caf. You know, so it was a trying time at UNC Asheville. And for me, I went home to the other side of town, and we were fine. Some people don't often remember also, Ivan was a good example of the first time that we saw price gouging on gas prices. In Asheville, gas soared to $4 a gallon, and a lot of people don't recall that with Ivan. Of course, the next year with Katrina is kind of what everyone remembers, with gas prices skyrocketing. But I thought this was funny. A few weeks ago when we were doing our Katrina coverage, I went and pulled a video from the gas lines with Katrina here in Central Georgia, and the gas price jumped to like $3 a gallon. And I know we would be angry if that happened now, but I just recall how angry we really were when gas jumped to $3 a gallon 10 years ago versus if it did it now. So the indirect impacts from these tropical systems is pretty interesting. We actually brought in someone from AAA and said, can this happen again 10 years later? If we get another Gulf storm, are we going to see this rapid jump in gas prices and society go crazy? And the short answer was yes, it can, and it probably will happen again. We have this huge supply of gas up in the Northeast for a disaster like that, but it probably won't matter enough. So from a societal standpoint, not only do we have to worry about the impacts weather-wise, but gas prices and things like that, we'll see that again with a storm like Ivan or Francis or Katrina if it were to happen again.
Jeff, my last question for you. In my opinion, there's no better learning than actually putting your hands on and doing it. With you being in college and studying meteorology, how did this help you in your career now? I mean, you got to actually see it happen. It was in your area. How did this help you with being a meteorologist?
Well, you respect it, and I think that's the first thing. UNC Asheville is a very hands-on program. And that's what attracted me. Not only, I lived in Asheville, but the program itself is very small, 4 professors, and it was a very applied program, a very hands-on program. So it wasn't, we spent the time doing the physics and the calculus and deriving equations, but the end result was to apply what we were learning to real-world situations. And, seeing that firsthand, I'm a hurricane guy now, and I think part of that was attributed to Ivan and the memories there, and seeing the flooding firsthand was pretty incredible. The neat thing about Western North Carolina and UNC Asheville specifically, if there's anybody listening that is maybe trying to get into the career as a meteorologist, UNC Asheville is the place to be. I mean, look at the weather you get to experience. You get the winter weather, the severe weather, the tropical potential. the upslope flow, the wedge, the summer temperatures. I mean, you just get it all. And so, adding Ivan to the arsenal was just kind of icing on the cake, so to speak.
Well, Jeff, we've thoroughly enjoyed having you on tonight, and hopefully we can wrap you back in for some other show later down the road.
Yeah, you know where to find me. I have 2 Twitter accounts now. I finally broke down and followed corporate policy and created an affiliate Twitter. So that's what's on my super on the bottom. It's at Jeff Cox WGXA. My other Twitter account is at WXman Jeff Cox. It's been around longer. Follow me, tweet me, let me know what you think, and I'll try to respond to you. I'm pretty active on Twitter these days. My wife kills me, but it's worth the battle.
Well, Jeff, we appreciate it, and hope to have you back on soon, and have a great newscast.
All right, thanks. Y'all have a good one.
Thank you.
Yeah, Scotty, I'll take it from here. I've got something for Gary Stevenson right now. Since you're in the Raleigh area, there was one storm that sort of got passed over in all of this while it was all happening. Hurricane Gaston. It was only a Category 1 when it made landfall. But it came through the Fayetteville and Raleigh area, right in between Francis and Ivan forming. I wouldn't be sure if you would remember that one coming through, since it was a small one, and these major ones were big and took up most of the media coverage. But Gary, do you remember Hurricane Gaston at all?
Yeah, if memory serves, and as I'm getting older, as you guys have pointed out, I am getting older tonight. We had actually a frontal boundary that was stalled out across the area when it came up. So it interacting with that front gave us a decent amount of severe weather. And if memory serves again, I think we had multiple tornado warnings that occurred because of that interaction. I was also looking at when you guys were talking about the tornadoes with Francis. We actually had numerous tornadoes that occurred across the southern part of our viewing area, the Sandhills, that came from Francis as well. And I really remember 2004 as being very active when it comes to severe weather. Even when we had the weaker systems coming in, it seems like every time we had a boundary in place. And when those interacted with those boundaries, we did have a good number of tornado warnings, and at least half of those were confirmed.
Right, and talking about tornadoes, that's exactly where I came across Hurricane Gaston. I think it was, Eric, I think it was you talking about the tornadoes with these hurricanes earlier, and I just looked up some of the damage from that, and found that there were all 4 of those hurricanes that came through spawned tornadoes as well in the Carolinas.
All right, Daniel, we'll throw it to you. We'll let you share your pictures, and then I kind of want Eric to kind of wrap up just the 2004 season altogether, because that was a fairly active tropical year in specs of storms, and then maybe give his prognostication of what he thinks is going to happen for the rest of the year tropics-wise, and definitely have Neil chime in as well. So, Daniel, you want to go ahead with your photos? And I know we're well past the 9 o'clock hour, so we'll show your photos, because they are just spectacular just to see the damage that occurred here in the foothills and mountains.
They are, and hey, it's just 9 o'clock. Somebody's bedtime. Don't worry about it. We're good. Jeff mentioned earlier Ivan was more stuck out to him than Francis, but I got to tell you, here on the eastern slopes of Blue Ridge, to me it was Francis. And it was the rainfall totals that fell. Here in McDowell County, we had widespread 8 to 10 inches of rain. But you get up on the higher slopes, you had 2 feet of rain in some areas. And bad enough as 8 to 10 inches of rain was, that double amount total had to come down into the upper Catawba Basin. And I'm going to show you guys some photos. First off, I'm going to show you a Google map of Marion, North Carolina. The main north-south highway is 221. And the main east-west is Highway 70, or the main non-interstate route. And, of course, the Catawba River snakes right through Marion. I don't know if you guys can really see it well. There's a huge shopping
screen yet, I don't think.
Okay, I'm sorry, guys. I might need to screen share that. It might help.
Yeah, if you want us to see it, maybe.
Let's see if I get here.
Here we go.
Okay, y'all good?
Yes,
Good.
sir. Yeah.
As you can see, this is like one of the main intersections in Marion. You've got US 221 North, US 70. If you've ever been through Marion before, basically Marion and McDowell County are two ridge lines, one on the north end and south end of the county, and then basically the Catawba River and the Catawba River Basin runs right through the middle of the county. So most of the county is fairly flat, like 1,300 feet elevation, compared to the corners of the counties where you shoot 2, 3, even 3,500 feet when you get up close to the parkway. So these photos I want to show you. First off, can you guys see this?
We're still on the Google Map view.
Okay. Well, I'm going to try to pull this up here right quick. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah. Let me pull up the maps here right quick and the pictures. Gotta love technology, folks.
Only when it works.
That's right.
Some swear by it, some swear at it.
Okay, we might be getting in business here. How about that, guys?
Yeah, it's pulled up now.
Okay, here's a map that I pulled up off, I can't remember exactly where this came from. This is a map of the track of Francis and the rainfall totals that ran all the way up the eastern part of the U.S. Photos I'm getting ready to show you are from folks in the media department at McDowell High School. They went out and took pictures of what was going on. First off, we have a satellite picture, visible image that was storm.
Well, hold up real quick. I don't think we've got the full view. We've got the library view of all the images, but...
oh boy, guys, come on. Let's see here. Okay. Oh. Guys, I don't know why these ain't pulling up. And now my phone's ringing. I'm not available, folks. I'm on a Google Hangout.
When you do the screen share, Daniel,
Yes.
Choose the entire screen selection, and that might help with showing it instead of the individual page.
Okay.
So we'll get Infinity here.
I tell you what, you guys talk for a second. I'm gonna try to figure this out. And I promise I'll get these photos on here.
Okay, we can do that. Let's throw it to Eric right quick. Eric, let's just kind of recap the 2004 season in a whole, and then maybe go into what you think tropical-wise we could see here in the last few months of the hurricane season.
Well, yeah, I mean, as I talked a little bit of before, you know, that the hurricanes that just kept coming in 2004. You know, I remember Jeanne, the last huge threat. Everyone in Florida was sick of hurricanes, and I was so happy it went farther north and missed us. But August and September were the busiest August-September combined that we ever seen in terms of ACE, the cyclone energy on record. It was just extremely busy, and then basically it shut off. We didn't have we had a few dinky tropical storms after that, but the more El Nino circulation kind of came in, and you know I'm hopeful that you know we've seen a lot of storms in the 2015 hurricane season, but I'm hopeful that as we go later in the season we'll have less of a likelihood for these types of storms. We've seen a lot of low-latitude storms in the deep tropics east of Lesser Antilles. Those become a lot less likely in October, and when that formation area shuts off, normally you'd go into the Western Caribbean or the Western Atlantic. El Nino, one of the big effects of El Nino is you get that strong shear in the Caribbean, so you're less likely to get a significant hurricane there. You always have to be, you know, be watching just to see if you get a kind of a quirky thing happening. But I'm hopeful that the season will end earlier than average. We don't know that, but that's what I'm personally hoping for. And we've got the depression out there now. Another system to the east will probably be a tropical depression over the next a day or so. So we'll have a little bit of activity. And for those that are watching the Eastern Pacific, there's some signs that there could be a little more more moisture, rainfall up toward the southwestern United States again next week. So there's a few interesting things to look at. But right now, the Atlantic stuff, mostly offshore, some sort of hybrid system near the Carolinas. We'll be watching it. But that's what I'm looking for the rest of the season.
And then, Neil, I'm going to throw it to you. As you know, forecasting in this area, we don't have to really deal with the storm surge and stuff like that. But my question to you is how does GSP first operate when tropical storms threat? And then second of all, I want you to kind of comment on, and I mean this loosely when I say this, but we kind of need a weak tropical storm to come up here and kind of alleviate the drought that we're in. We need some kind of tropical influence to kind of get us some rain up here. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that as well.
Okay, well, whenever we have a remnant tropical cyclone coming up here, we're going to basically take the schedule off because there's just 10 forecasters here. We usually have 2 to 3 interns. So our staffing is limited to start with, but we'll optimize it as much as we can. Who specializes on radar interrogation will take the lead on that. Who specializes in hydrology will take the window of time that's going to be impacted the most by either the period of the heaviest rain or the period that's going to come when the rivers rise from the rainfall. So we'll optimize the staffing as much as we can, and we'll start off by issuing the necessary watches for wind products and hydrology products. We'll coordinate with some of our partners at the River Forecast Center to get the modeling tailored to the rainfall that we're expecting, and we would issue those long stem river flood warnings first, and then as the event unfolds, we'll be doing more flash flood warnings, more flood advisories, and more statements. And of course, a big time investment is just gathering those reports and processing those as well. So it's every time we get these events, they're big events for us. But it doesn't take these big events to have a big impact. Just 2 weeks ago, over in the eastern part of the Charlotte metro area, we had a 100-year rainfall event that produced quite severe flooding right along Goose Creek. And Goose Creek is a small creek that many people may never have heard of until it floods. So that kind of highlights the need of preparedness. These big rain events can happen in any kind of situation. It doesn't have to be a tropical remnant moving across. It can just be training thunderstorms to have a devastating impact. So it's good to know your area, good to know the name of the rivers and streams that you see as you're driving on your daily commute, and what's around your house. And just kind of monitor the situation and listen to watches and warnings from the Weather Service to prepare for these events. As far as the tropical system coming through, as Eric had said, there's not much hope for the rest of the season. But we did have kind of this little small low that lifted up out of the Florida Panhandle last week that was good for a good 1 to 2 inches of rainfall. Some areas even got 3 to 4 inches of rainfall out of it. So that was a welcome event to come passing through.
Yeah, I mean, it's really worth saying that when you have, in 1994 you had nothing, no hurricanes in September and October. And then in November of 94 you had 2 hurricanes occur. But just because it's quiet now doesn't mean it can't happen. It just means the probabilities are lower. But we still have a few months to go.
Very, very good, and that is true. And Gary, I would like to bring you in because you were on-air meteorologist in Asheville, and a lot of these heavy rain events, and Neil, you can chime in on this as well, are because of the upslope, the rain that's coming in from those. Kind of talk about why that intensifies the rainfall amounts here in the Western Carolinas and the upstate.
Jeff mentioned it earlier. It's called orographic lift, and you start getting that moisture that is getting forced up those mountains, and then you get the cooling process, and literally the moisture gets wrung out of the atmosphere. And when you have a system like Francis and Ivan, where you've got the circulation counterclockwise coming in, where it's hitting the eastern slopes of the mountains, rising, squeezing that tropical moisture out, you're going to get a tremendous amount of rainfall. And then as Neil talked about the flooding just a minute ago, when you start getting that kind of heavy rain in that kind of terrain, it's almost like pouring water into a funnel, and it's going to go into a small creek and a small stream, and all of a sudden you've got a raging river right there. But that is one thing I definitely learned when I was at UNC Asheville, was the term orographic lift, because there was a lot of that functioning with a lot of different weather systems that crossed across western North Carolina. I mean, just because of that, Transylvania County actually theoretically has a tropical climate because of all the moisture that comes in. As moisture comes in from South Carolina, gets lifted up those the mountains, and Transylvania County, I don't know what the exact rainfall is yearly, but it is basically one of the wettest, on average, one of the wettest areas of North Carolina, because of the orographic lift that takes place with moisture coming out of South Carolina up into North Carolina.
Yeah, it makes for long, difficult nights covering weather and especially flooding with those lifts there. Daniel, I think you may have got everything figured out.
Yeah, I'm going to take one more stab at it, guys.
All right, we'll kind of close off the show with Daniel's photos, and then we'll kind of get some closing comments, and we'll get off here by 9:30.
Yeah, maybe. If it works.
Maybe.
All right, I'll go ahead and present you.
Okay. You guys see that?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Excellent.
Full screen.
Good. Again, here, some images from Francis that was coming inland across the Florida Panhandle as it was coming up through Georgia. This was on, I believe, the 7th of September, 2004. And this is really when it was peaking for the Western Carolinas. Just a great visible satellite image. And here's a radar image of what's going on. This was taken at mid-afternoon on the 7th of September. But, the Catawba River is a good-sized river that starts here in McDowell County. And when you have the eastern slopes of the mountains, you have all the runoff, and then you have what fell over the county. It really put out some amazing photos. In fact, here's one. Can you guys see this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, folks, I never saw that in my life. Matter of fact, the morning that all that started happening, my dad, who worked in Morganton all of his life, he was going to go to work. Well, at 5:30 in the morning, he gets within a half a mile where this picture was, and he turns around. He tells me, well, I'm not going to work today. And I'm thinking, oh, whatever. And he's like, I'm going to show you. And I was like, I don't believe it. And he took me out at daylight. And I saw that, and that stunned me, because the Catawba River, if you look at this picture to the left, if you're familiar with Marion, you got a huge shopping center on the left. The Catawba River is 1 to 2/10 of a mile away. It's not running right next to the highway, and that was a good probably 4 or 5 feet deep in that area, and it was amazing. The kind of flooding, and that's what widespread 8 to 10 inches would give you, and those extra amounts coming off the mountains, because it's filling up all the tributaries and all the streams that fed into the Catawba. Here's some more pictures at the KFC in Marion. That's probably a half a mile or so below the original picture I showed you. I'll pull up some more. And again, the thing about the Catawba, there's some floodplains and some low-lying areas that the water naturally runs through, like this picture right here. This is at the River Breeze Campground. And just swallowed it up. And the crazy thing about it, and like I mentioned earlier, in the mountainous terrain, you tend to have the quick flash flooding that's gone. Well, this water sat here for like 2 days, and it basically shut Marion down for 2 days. Here's another picture. This is close to where the original was. This is a McDonald's. Here's the shopping center, and basically here's a lake. It was just amazing what was going on right there. Again, that's 8 to 10 inches widespread, and along the mountain chains, double that amount. There's another view from current West McDowell Middle School, looking at the shopping center. There's somebody who attempted to drive their truck, didn't turn out too well. But right here's the photo that's amazing.
Wow.
If you're familiar with McDowell County, can you guys see this?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Good. If you're familiar with McDowell County, if you go up US 221 on the far northern end of the county, not far from Linville Caverns, there's a place called Mountain Paradise Campground. This is the North Fork of the Catawba River, and you can kind of see in the picture the way the river's supposed to run from left to right in the picture. Well, the river and all the rock that was coming off Linville Falls Mountain was it made its way down into the valley, and it completely destroyed that area. Far northern McDowell County, 221 right there was closed for like 3 weeks. The combination of that and 3 mudslides close to Linville Caverns, between Linville Caverns and the Avery County line, shut down 221 for like 3 weeks. And for a lot of people in the far northern stretch of McDowell County, they were isolated. And to me, and this right here to me is the proof that, at least for our area in McDowell County, Francis was definitely the bigger deal. This is where the most destruction happened. This is another little floodplain area along the Catawba, filled up. And right here is the main Catawba River Bridge on Highway 70 West near Marion. You can see right here, this is not actually at its highest point. You can see the water and the stain on the bridge supports, just how high the water got. And it literally shut down McDowell County, the city of Marion, and a lot of places in McDowell County for several days. And it was really something that it took forever to recover from. So to me, that was the big thing about Francis. The good thing about Ivan, we got like 3 to 6, a little bit higher amounts, as Neil showed on the graphic earlier. But it wasn't that what we had during Francis. And to this very day, that those pictures still stun me, because I'd never seen that. It's the only time I've ever seen it in my life. And I believe that ranks 3rd all time. I believe the 77 flood might be the worst, and then the second one was like 1916 or something like that, and then that in 2004.
Daniel, you hit on something, though, talking about those people being cut off in McDowell County. I think that's one thing that most people really need to take away when they're being prepared for a disaster, is you could get cut off, or you may not have resources for days. And if you're expecting a government agency to help you out, they're overloaded at that point. So I think it's up to each individual to be prepared, knowing their area very well, and knowing that you may be 5 to 7 days without power, without water. You need food, you need supplies, you need medicine. And I think when we talk about any natural disaster, being prepared, and a hurricane kit is as good as a blizzard kit, the water, the food, stuff like that. People just need to be prepared and really know that more than likely they're going to be on their own if it's a widespread event like we've been talking about this evening.
Yeah, no, for sure, Gary. And, in that specific area, that was the only road. And not only did that affect McDowell County, that affected people that were trying to go up into the mountains, that affected truckers who were trying to send stuff into the high country, to all the resort towns, to Boone and stuff like that. I mean, it was blocked off. As a matter of fact, speaking of that, I believe 321 in Caldwell County, going from Lenore up to the top to Blowing Rock, it got shut down because of mudslides. So literally, there were areas in western North Carolina that got cut off for weeks.
Yeah, that's like the '93 blizzard when they were actually flying supplies in the boom. So yeah, I mean that's I think Katrina proved that with me more than anything, more than any disaster is you better be prepared to take care of yourself for a while, because it's not that the government agencies don't want to get in there and help you. It's not like the National Guard doesn't want to help you, but in a widespread natural disaster, they're overwhelmed.
Yeah, and I think Scotty has one picture he'd also like to show about the flooding.
Yeah, this kind of sums up what I remember. I was a sophomore in high school, so obviously we were out of school for an entire week. Our football field at Freedom High School was completely flooded. The stands actually had to be taken down because of some water damage. But this is what we call Riverside Plaza, and this building that you're looking at is actually a Queen City appliance store. And I don't know if you can see behind it, but those are washing machines, dryers, TVs, all floating in the water. And they were there for a few days, and that's what I'm reminded of when I think of this, is just seeing those items just floating. And this is a good quarter of a mile from where the river was supposed to be, and it was deep. There's another restaurant in our area called Judge's Riverside Barbecue. I wasn't able to find a photo of it, but I remember the night of Francis traveling on Highway 70, and all you could see was the roof of the barbecue restaurant. And if you are ever in Morganton and you eat there, they have one whole wall of pictures of the restaurant and of the damage inside, and then how they've rebuilt from that. So that's just kind of what I wanted to share, what my memories are of the storm. So it was very just mind-blowing, just seeing all this water, and like everyone's talked about, back-to-back, 10-day span of another historic flood. It kind of mesmerizes you, and I believe, Daniel, I would love for you to comment on this. I think a lot of the folks here in Western North Carolina have kind of forgot about this, and it doesn't resonate with them as much as it maybe does us weather enthusiasts who work in the weather enterprise. But what you were talking about, Gary, having that disaster kit, either it be a hurricane kit or a severe weather kit or a blizzard kit, is always great to have, because you never know when you are going to be cut off. And there was roads here in Morganton that I would have never thought in a million years that would be shut down. Highway 181, Highway 18, Highway 70, three major thoroughfares in Burke County all shut off for a few days just because water were coming over the bridges. And the bridges, in fact, when the water receded, they had to kind of look at the structure and make sure the bridges were safe for people to travel on. So you never know how many days you may be without a way of traveling or food or anything like that when these events come through.
Scotty, the one thing I will say, and it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, my and your generation never saw that happen. And, government entities, they have floodplain maps, and they kind of have a simulation of what they think is going to happen. Well, I can tell you right now, 2004 put government people on the ball to update those maps, because it did do stuff that I don't think anybody expected would happen. But that's kind of it's almost like a trial by error thing. It's probably going to make things better in the future, as we had mentioned earlier tonight. This is really something that we've learned a lot from, and in the future will make things better, be a little bit more prepared.
And Gary, I believe just about a week ago, your old station WLOS kind of did a memory of the effects of this, and I know our good buddy Daniel, Chris Justice, has done a story about the inland effects of hurricanes, and it has gathered people's attention, but some people who are not as enthused about weather or kind of pushes it to the back burner still don't know if they're as prepared. And it's likely to happen again. We don't know when, but the possibility is there.
Yeah, that's the thing with weather, and it's like I said about the systems. When you've got two tropical systems that come within 2 weeks of each other of the same area in North Carolina, you're going to see major flooding. And the problem is with the public, and Daniel kind of hit on this on the generational thing, if you haven't experienced it, the worst you've experienced is the worst that it can be. So if you haven't experienced a 100-year or 500-year flood, then you don't know what to expect. So a lot of times you're going into an event and you don't exactly know what it's going to be. I think Daniel was right too as far as the floodplain maps. The '99 event with Dennis and Floyd, that kind of got the ball rolling, and I think the floodplain maps were actually being redrawn at that point, but they just didn't quite make it in before Ivan and Francis moved into western North Carolina. But there has been a lot of talk this hurricane season about floodplains and where they are in North Carolina. We ran a story last week about how people could actually get on the government flood site, put in their address, and see how susceptible they are to flooding. Now the question is, what's going to prod them into actually getting in there and saying, yeah, I need to put my address in to see if I need flood insurance? Unfortunately, a lot of times it's a flood that, you know, kind of pushes them, and then it's too late at that point. But preparedness is definitely always the best thing. You can't stop it, but you can be semi-prepared for it.
Most definitely. Well, guys, it's well past 9:30, so we'll kind of close off here. I would like Eric, you and Neil and Gary, maybe give us a way that our followers or viewers can get in touch with you if they have any specific questions or just want to follow you on Twitter. All of you guys, Eric, I love reading your stuff about hurricanes, and the National Weather Service in Greenville-Spartanburg, they are really active on Twitter, so that's another good follow as well, and especially Gary on his site. He's talking about airplanes, weather, and everything else good. So we'll start with Eric. And Eric, first of all, we appreciate you coming on, and we'll let you plug your social media outlets.
Well, thanks for having me. And again, my personal Twitter account is @EricBlake12. I'm kind of hotter cold on there. The official information is all from NHC or @NHC_Atlantic or Pacific, depending on your point of view. But we'll see. I mean, I've kind of been cold in there recently, and maybe things will get me a little more interested to tweet about something interesting I see.
Definitely. Well, we appreciate you coming on, Eric, and hopefully we can get you back on next hurricane season and kind of give you let you give us the rundown of what to expect.
Sure.
All right, and Neil, we appreciate you. I know you guys are a little short-staffed down there in GSP, so I appreciate you taking some time away and joining us tonight.
Sure, it was a lot of fun. You can read about some of our case studies about Ivan at our website. I'm the webmaster, so I got to plug our webpage, but it's weather.gov/GSP. You can find our local research page. And you can follow us on Twitter at NWSGSP. But this September of 2004 was a very unusual month because it didn't rain unless it was associated with either Francis, Ivan, or Jeanne. There was no rain in between those three systems. And that's pretty impressive because you end up, like here at GSP, we had over 12 inches of rainfall. But most of the month was dry. Very, very unusual.
That is an interesting fact. I didn't realize that. And Neil is the one that has to put up with all of our back and forth in the NWS chat, Daniel. So we now we can put a name with the face.
That's good. I hope we don't bug you too much down there. Thank you everything that you do for our area, and thank you for your help with us with Foothills Weather Network, because it takes a lot of help on both sides, from your end to our end on social media, to get the word out about what's happening weather-wise.
Oh, sure. You guys and your group are a tremendous help to us. As you know, if anything gets into the uniform area, we can count on you guys to send us reports, and that's a major help, especially when you're sitting in the hot seat issuing warnings.
Yeah, like Daniel said, we appreciate our partnership with you guys down there, and look forward to giving you some more information once we get some weather to move through here. It's kind of been boring, so until I go out of town, and then all heck breaks loose. So, and then we'll close off with Gary, Mr. Stevenson. give us your Twitter accounts and Facebook and however else we can bug you with.
I tell you what, you got my name right for a change. Took an hour and a half to do. I got to say to Neil, too, that's an interesting fact about no rainfall except from tropical systems that September. That's pretty wild. I guess the systems used all the moisture, but always a great time to be with you guys. On Facebook, Chief Meteorologist Gary Stevenson, like Scotty said. Anything that's in the sky, space, birds, airplanes, weather ends up on my page. Twitter, gstevenson_WX. I try to post as much as I can on it to try to keep it active as I can with all things, like I said, sky, space, whatever. But again, great being on with you again this evening.
Yeah, we bring Gary in for the big shows, for the big events. So we always enjoy having you on, Gary, and we look forward to having you back on this program sometime soon. And I definitely will get your name right. Like I told you in our Facebook message, too many notes right here, so I'm good now.
Too much junk going through your brain right now, right? I appreciate it, man. No problem.
That's right. Well, guys, again, thank you for watching tonight. We appreciate you joining us, and hopefully you were able to kind of get the ins and outs of the active 2004 hurricane season, and we appreciate our guests for joining us. Next week, we're going to have on Mr. Rob Dale, who is emergency manager up in Michigan. We're going to talk about weather safety and outdoor events. I know that's been a topic with Major League Baseball and concerts and all kinds of festivals and stuff. So we're going to kind of talk about what you need to know if you're outdoor at an event and a severe storm or windstorm or anything like that was to affect your area. So we hope you join us next week, and we hope you have a great weekend. And until next week, we'll see you later.